All right, so ladies and gentlemen, salam. We're just gonna give everyone a couple minutes, and we're gonna wait for Dan to join us, and we shall get started. Aslam, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining. Hello, Aslam, how's it going? We're just giving everyone a couple minutes to join, including Dan, our special guest for the day. Walaikum assalam. We're just giving everyone a couple minutes. All right. Oh, hello
Hey,
there.
hey, how's it going?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect. I think we may have little bit of a connection fiasco going on, but am I smooth for you there?
Yeah,
Uh-oh,
pretty smooth.
pretty smooth. Okay.
I think so. How am I?
You are
Is that better?
okay. Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay,
Awesome.
awesome. Cool.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, Dan. Really appreciate it.
No, of course.
I guess we're just gonna give everyone a couple minutes before we get started. This should also give us an opportunity to test the connection real quick as well.
Sure.
Give me 1 second here. How's your trips thus far? I know you're out and about once again
Yeah,
in
it's
a
good. It's
new
good.
adventure.
It's nice to be you know, getting back to normal, right?
Yeah. Your normal routine. Your normal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wait, you're in Canada now?
Yeah, I am in Toronto, Canada.
How's the situation there?
So far so good actually. The cases are declining and everyone seems to be quite responsible, which I'm thrilled about.
That's great.
Yeah, and so yeah, everyone is just caring for each other. They're very vigilant, they're very respectful of our laws. And I think, people are ready for summer and they just want to,
Yeah. Get back
cooperate
to
so that they
normal.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, the government I think has done a decent job of enforcing that.
Oh, that's
So,
good.
so far
That's
so
good.
good. Super. Yeah, it looks like our connection is stable, and we gave a couple minutes for everybody. Yeah, so just want to say hello, assalamu alaikum, yakhshimsiz, bonjour to everybody, whoever's watching, as many languages I can speak. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have our amazing guest, Dan, who has been advocating for Uyghurs recently, and he has been involved with a lot of Uyghur related activism and just education for a while now. And we just want to take some time to learn a little bit more about himself, his just absolutely phenomenal adventures that I'm super jealous of. Traveling almost every country in the world so far. This adventure that he has, and yeah, as well as what kind of got him interested in the Uyghurs and so forth. So once again, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're out, on your next adventure at the moment, so for you to take a pause to speak with us means a lot to us. And before all this, I also want to extend my sincere gratitude and appreciation for you to even know who the Uyghurs are, or Uyghurs, the Western way of saying it, pronunciation. just the fact that you know about us means so much to us. But you going above and beyond is just makes us speechless. So thank you. Yeah, and for our friends, ladies and gentlemen who's watching right now, if you guys leave a comment below with any questions or comments you have, I'll try to pick up on those and kind of use those for our point of conversation as well. So yeah, please, do you mind
Great,
giving
great.
us a rundown of who you are, as well as what brought you to kind of learning more about the Uyghurs?
Sure.
Mhm.
So thank you. Firstly, thank you to you, and thank you to the Dahmen Foundation for having me today. Um, so my name's Dan. Basically, I'm from Australia, and I've had sort of a long time fascination with the Uyghurs. Through my Instagram, you can see I've sort of been on this long, sort of decade-long journey with the
Mhm.
goal of visiting every country. So with that has come with a lot of opportunities to learn about different cultures, learn different histories, and yeah, and I've also been very fortunate to have the opportunity to live in a number of different countries, which is where I guess I sort of learnt more about the Uyghurs. Um,
Mhm.
in terms of how I guess my interest became a little deeper, I was always, like I said, I was always fascinated by the Uyghurs and fascinated by, I guess, Central Asian cultures in general, which I think is just by virtue of living in Australia, where you have so little interaction with something, with a culture that's really foreign to what we have here. And then through my university studies, I majored in Chinese, in Mandarin, and I was living in Beijing at the time. And it was during that period where obviously I came a lot in contact with many Uyghurs. I used to frequent, Uyghur restaurants and whatnot. And then towards the end of my time when I was studying in China, I basically was like, I'm going west. And I spent about a month amongst the Uyghurs, learning from your people, learning about your people. And then from there, I actually continued on into Central Asia to the Stan countries,
Mhm.
which added a new perspective in many ways due to obviously a large and noticeable Uyghur diaspora over there. And basically, while I was over there, I would always ask people about the Uyghurs, and it was interesting to sort of see, how do I describe it? Sort of this pan-Turkic culture and the way you guys, the way that the Central Asian cultures interact with each other. And I think that's sort of where my journey started and how I got into this journey. And then, by virtue of that, I proceeded to, as part of my undergraduate study, to basically go on this sort of research drive into Uyghur minority language continuity and basically the consequences of what we're seeing as language education policies
Mhm.
on behalf of the Chinese government. And yeah, and the next step in this process is I'm hoping to continue a master's focusing again on Uyghur minority language and the connections with culture and cultural continuity and cultural heritage and cultural identity. So it's a really interesting
Wow.
area for me.
Yeah, no, I see how things transpire just one after the other. You're just like going like, wow, 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 wow. Like this is
Exactly,
like this whole,
exactly.
like I can just imagine you being your sensors being overloaded, right? By
Totally,
this
totally.
fascination, right? So, dang, wow. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is like when you visit China, I don't know, I'm sure you know, but China has over 50 something, minorities, and there's a lot of different cultures surrounding China. I think the Uyghurs are one of the most, I guess, with the highest population. But with that being said, what drove you to the Uyghurs specifically? Was it just how unique we were from most, cultures you've seen, or what kind of, levitated you towards us?
Okay. I guess as a generalization, I've always been interested in what people call, China's ethnic borderlands, just sort of the minorities that live around the edges.
Yeah.
And I've lived for the past few years in Hong Kong, and obviously, a semi-comparable situation, what's going on there, or maybe will be
Mhm.
in the future. And I find that really fascinating.
Mhm.
And I guess with the Uyghurs, there's obviously the ethnic difference.
Mhm.
So within a Chinese context, Uyghurs look different. You stick out. They're
So
not
it's more
ethnically Han, right?
drastically different, right? Right, right. Okay.
And especially living in Beijing or Shanghai is, there are Uyghur, kebab sellers and naan sellers, and you see them and they're visible, and it's interesting to
Yeah.
see them sort of as a fabric of modern, as part of the fabric of modern China. On top of that, I think just, the more I research, the more unique Uyghur culture is. I guess sort of its separate history, its separate cultural identity.
Mhm.
Unlike other minority groups in China, such as the Hui, or such as the ones down south in Guangxi around there, who I guess have had a much longer history of living amongst Han Chinese, and their culture and history is really a lot more integrated, in my opinion. Uyghur civilization is, clearly, a separate historical entity, and I think that's
Right.
what makes it really, really interesting.
Okay, that's what kind of you felt more gravitated towards because of all these different factors, right? I can understand that.
Totally.
So, I mean, as you know, because of like the political situation, what's going on, China's making it really difficult for any information to go out. And I know they've been kicking out even journalists for a long time now. And even when they do have them over, it's quite restricted. So can you give me an idea as to like what time frame, like how long you spent when you were there, like when you kind of left? And I mean, did you personally encounter any type of, I don't know, discomfort, like whether your passports were checked often, or you were asked to not film something, anything like that? I'm just curious, personally.
Sure. So I visited in 2014.
Mhm.
Now, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the situation was pretty crap then. I feel like now we have a lot more information just due to that big BBC story on the camps, and things coming out from the Guardian. But I pretty much understand that that was all happening in 2014. We just didn't really know much about it.
Right. It was more
So
prevalent.
yeah,
Right.
so in 2014 things were already tense. I had the, I guess, good. Are you there?
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, okay. Just
Did I
got a
lose
ping.
you?
Let's try again.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I had the fortune at the time. I was studying in Beijing at Tsinghua University, which obviously it's a little bit of a prestigious university. It has a bit of reputation. So I sort of was traveling around, flashing my Tsinghua student ID card, and that sort of got me through without many questions. It was sort of
Right.
my passport was actually irrelevant, simply due to the fact that the Chinese soldiers at the checkpoints, they couldn't read English, so they would just kind of look at it and they'd turn to me and say, normally they would just turn to me and say Pakistan, like that was all they knew, right? Like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
couldn't decipher the English letters.
yeah.
In saying that, I obviously experienced a fair bit of discomfort, and I should add that even when I was living in Beijing, and even in, I've traveled when I was living in Hong Kong, I traveled to China very often. I very regularly get mistaken for a Uyghur, and so
Yeah.
I've actually been like physically pulled off a metro in Beijing, and the first thing they say is like Uyghur, and I'm like, no, no, no. So yeah, at every checkpoint during my travels, and I spent a lot of time just traveling
Yeah.
between towns and on highways. When the soldiers would come on the bus, I would always be taken off with the Uyghurs. So the Chinese would stay on the bus, and I'd be in the
Oh my
lines,
God.
right? So,
That's their best inference.
yeah, well, I think for me personally, it was actually it was pretty amazing in the sense that I sort of felt like I was bearing witness to something which I didn't you don't read about online, and I was lucky that I had the safety of my passport or whatever. Like nothing was going to happen to me.
I think in hindsight, that was a quite a unique experience for you to be able to kind
Totally,
of blend into the Uyghurs
totally.
and experience as far as where your identity will actually be verified and you won't be in grave danger, but you will experience everything up until that grave danger. So
Hmm.
that's quite interesting, and I don't think not many foreigners will have that opportunity.
Mm, mm,
So,
mm, mm.
for
But
better or
being
worse,
right,
what you look like, dude, that kind of give you an enhanced experience per se, I guess, right? So that's really interesting.
yeah, well,
Um,
as in you've kind of even when I was in the larger cities like Kola or Kashgar, I would walk into a Han Chinese suburb, or my hotel would be in a Han Chinese suburb or whatever, and just the reaction or just the look of people around me was like, oh wow, I'm sort of sensing a bit, I'm getting a bit more of a palpable feel of what's actually happening here on the ground.
yeah. Right, right. No, I completely understand. So moving on to our next question real quick, just because we have an hour max left and we
Hmm.
want to absorb as much from you as possible. And in my, so from every, actually, before I get to that, first and foremost, what kind of sparked your interest in starting, or going into learning about different, cultures and minorities within your studies, like within your master's degree? Like, what kind of, triggered that motivation for you?
Um, I think, like I said, I completed a master's in Chinese studies, so Mandarin language and Chinese culture, and so I think I sort of was always interested in, I guess, I guess minority rights within within like the greater China context. And obviously, I think the Tibetan issue is, there's a lot of literature on that. There's a lot of people that have opinions. It's sort of hogged the headlines for 20, 30 years, and it always struck me as quite
Rightfully
interesting.
so,
Right,
unfortunately.
exactly, rightfully so. But it always struck me as interesting how similar the Uyghur situation was, and yet
Mhm.
especially when I'm looking at sort of 2010, 2011, 2012, there was nothing about the Uyghurs online. Now you kind of get a little bit of media presence, but literally only 10 years ago, there was nothing. There were a handful of books you could buy with some kind of, some kind of interest in the topic or something in depth. And, back then, when I was living in China, I could visit Xinjiang pretty freely. There were sort of no restrictions traveling around. Like, yeah, there were checkpoints and whatnot, but there were no. I understand now to visit a lot of these smaller towns is just impossible,
Yeah,
especially as a foreigner. So I think that was what was interesting for me, in that I could kind of see the direction I could take it by looking at the Tibet example, but I was sort of looking at a whole new issue, which at the time there wasn't much on, and even now there's still, considering how significant it is, there's still very minimal, and I think in the last probably 12 to 24 months there's been a lot more, a real sudden interest in it, which is fantastic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. With the rest of the world, I think more information leaks. Like we get a little and we give a lot. Is what has been the response, which has been phenomenal, right? We're just
Mhm.
running with whatever information that comes out, and a lot of people are showing their support because they emphasize with how we're feeling because we were just like you and I, like we just lived a normal life and then our world just got flipped upside down. It's things are getting got really worse, right, in the recent years.
Mhm.
Now you mentioned that like what when you were there, like what was the most profound thing that kind of really struck you or resonated with you in terms of like our ethnic identity? What kind of food, or was it our, clothing, our music? What was it that like you were like, holy, like I would love to like, enjoy this as much as I can?
How do I answer this? Look, as a whole, the entire experience, I was in love with it, and I think a lot of my followers can probably relate to this. The comments I've gotten in the last weeks about story series was basically, this doesn't look like China. This looks awesome. Like, what is this, right? Which is so cool, and that's kind of what I felt. I had interactions with Uyghurs before, and where I was living in Beijing was quite close to I can't remember the name, but the minority student university. So there were a lot of Uyghurs around there, But just in terms of the colors, the traditional dress, the foods, it really is a whole world I hadn't experienced. I hadn't previously been to a Central Asian country, so that was really cool. The I guess what I would call the unique type of Islam within Uyghur society was fascinating. If I had to pick one standout cultural moment, it's probably visiting the mazar just outside Hotan. Walking through the desert, being surrounded by these tall, multicolored flags, men just chanting with their feet dug in the sand. That is a surreal experience. That is something you simply cannot get anywhere else in the world. And yeah, I think there were a lot of moments like that where I just fell in love with the culture and fell in love with the people. I was there during Ramadan, so obviously I was invited to many iftars. And there was also a few instances where, I'd be walking in the street and I'd have a drink of my bottle and some old man would scream something at me I didn't understand, and I was like,
It's like your Uyghur,
yeah, exactly.
Right? The elders are enforcing that. That's hilarious.
Exactly.
Just like a fun side thing. As you know, Uyghurs is spelled Uyghur, but when foreigners or non-Uyghurs pronounce it, it's Wegur. Uyghur, right? Uyghur. So can you try saying Uyghur? I'm just curious to see if you can pronounce it.
Uyghur.
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 Yeah, there you go. Uyghur. Very close, very close. You got it. Uyghur. So now my next question is, if you had the opportunity to go back, do you have kind of, top 5 or top 3 things that you really want to check off? Like, what would you want to be able to do?
Sure.
With the opportunity?
To be honest, I don't know why, but I didn't get to Khulja. So that's just kind of Khulja. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right.
Khulja. Yep.
Khulja. Yeah, right. Khulja. I didn't get there. I think one of the interesting dynamics about my trip was I was basically living in China before that, and obviously access to the internet in China is difficult. So my resources for traveling were so limited, and I was kind of on the ground and asking people like, "What's a nice town? What's a I'm looking for historic sites. I'm looking for and I was just kind of following the road and stopping at every town. And for whatever reason, Khulja just wasn't in my route. And then I left, and I speak to Uyghurs, and they're like, "You didn't go to Khulja?"
You know what, Dan? What I recently discovered too, I've been in Canada for over 16 years now.
Wow.
I recently discovered that many Uyghurs in diaspora are from Ulja.
Exactly.
I was like, oh, what? What is going on? Are all Uyghurs from Ulja? I guess we're all from Ulja now. Oh my goodness. So so that prompted me to try and want to learn more about Ulja, because it's just so fascinating, and I'm sure there's a reason why most Uyghurs, or many Uyghurs, at least in the diaspora, are from Ulja. So that's really fascinating. I think there's a separate rich history or something to learn about it. Just in itself, right?
Totally.
I know that each separate region in East Turkestan, or I guess now politically or on the map known as Xinjiang, occupied land, the now occupied land by China, there's rich history in every specific region, right? So for example, myself, I'm from a city I was born in a city called Kumul. I was raised in Urumqi, which is our capital. But, for example, we're known for our melons, right? So whenever you see melon from China, that's my people that are, working ever so diligently in the hot sun, raising those delicious melons. My people, some of us look a little bit more typical Asian, because we have more Mongolian influence or Mongolian blood kind of thing, at least from my DNA. So it's really fascinating how you get different type of Uyghurs from different type of regions, right? I'm sure you noticed that as well.
Totally.
Super fascinating.
Even just the naan, how every single town had a different type of naan, and
different sorts of naan, right?
Right? That's crazy.
I'm sure you ate different versions of polo as well. The rice with the carrots. Some of them
Yeah, yeah.
put almonds in it, or like nuts in it, or raisins. There's just different ways, different twists to it, right?
Mm.
Now, for yourself, I'm curious. What's your ethnic background?
Okay, so I'm Jewish, and so sort of my whole family background is, I guess, what
Are you
you'd call
sure?
like, pardon?
What? You're Jewish?
Yeah,
What? I wouldn't have guessed. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And so my background's just kind of like like a mixed European heritage.
Really? Wow. That's fascinating. That's really,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
fascinating. Wow. I thought you had some kind of like Pakistani or some kind of, Afghani, some kind of influence from somewhere, right?
Well,
Dang,
that's
okay.
if they don't think I'm Uyghur, they think I'm Afghan.
Um, moving forward, so like so once you finish your studies, like and hopefully get to travel the rest of the world. I mean, you've already traveled to North Korea as well, so I'm sure you'll knock off the rest of the, places
Thanks, man.
in your list. So that I'm very confident in that. Like, what do you aspire for in the next, coming couple of years or so? What are some of your top of mind
Uh,
goals?
it's really hard. I can't say I have a clear goal. Like I said, I'm starting this master's later this year where I'll be focusing on minority rights, minority language rights. So hopefully I'll be taking my future career in that direction. But yeah, I think a big decision of going on that path was to sort of move towards a career in that field.
Right, right. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
stepping aside from just the Uyghur topic real quick, I know I'm sure every kind of global traveler, I don't know what you guys are called, even if you have a label or not, but they have something, different to talk about when they get the question, what was the most fascinating thing, or what was the biggest influence that you had? Just in your words, really briefly, like what do you think has been the most kind of fascinating, influence? What has been, I guess, the pros, if not cons as well, of traveling so many countries? Well, how has that been for you?
Right. Okay. It's interesting. It's interesting you asked this question because it's actually I had maybe a Q&A on my Instagram about a month ago, and someone
Okay.
asked the same question. And
Okay.
when I gave my answer, one of my answers, I said there's four things from my travels which have influenced me, which have greatly influenced me, and one of them was my experiences amongst the Uyghurs. And I
Okay.
had so many replies being like, share these stories. It was obviously 2014. There was no Instagram. There was nothing.
Oh,
And I was really shocked to see so many people ask about it. And I was like, okay, I can share this.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that question kind of led me to, I guess, get in touch with you guys.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I guess sort of the four greatest experiences from my travels was, I guess the first thing was probably I was about 20 years old, and it was local in Australia, and I basically traveled up to some Aboriginal communities about 4 or 5 hours from my town, and that really opened my eyes to sort of another side of my country.
Mm,
In a similar vein, my experiences amongst the Uyghur people was again sort of broadening that worldview and just how do I put it, gaining an insight into a conflict, gaining an insight into I guess what you'd call a clash of civilizations, really. Um, then moving on from that, in the last year or so, I've visited numerous war zones, and I think um, seeing people in that sort of conflict zone or in that post-conflict zone, and seeing you know kids with barely enough food to eat, and parents who are literally struggling to stay alive due to a war or due to a famine or whatnot. That affects you. You take that with you. And then I think the last sort of monumental thing I experienced was actually when I was living in Hong Kong, and the protest movement last year was unlike anything I'd seen before. And it's sort of I don't know what the right word is. Perhaps inspirational. Perhaps it just moves you emotionally. But to see kids on the line and they're ready to die, and that there's a real risk they could die. that really affects you. And I was living and working right in the heart of where all that was going on.
Hmm. Wow, that's very profound. I think, sometimes I feel like there are many people around the world that are aware of such situations, but I feel like whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they take this ignorance is a bliss kind of approach. If I don't know about it, it probably will not happen or it's not going to happen, right? So I'm just going to keep focusing on myself because it's too sad, it's too devastating, right? Or if they look into it, sometimes I feel like people have been desensitized to these type of horror stories because there's just so many people suffering around the world, right? So it's just like their attention span is just grabbed everywhere. So, like, one of my personal things that I try to think about is like, there are so many Uyghurs that are suffering. What can we do to earn the attention of as many people as possible that's non-Uyghur? What can we do? Like, what can we say, to say, hey, like, we deserve a bit of your attention, like, or we would love, or we would appreciate your attention, like, why should they care, right? Why should they learn more about this? And I think with your passion for adventures, like, you kind of like, stepped into that, maybe unbeknownst to yourself, but, one thing after another. So I'm really glad that at least you got to experience that for yourself. So, I mean, leading up to my next question for that, what do you think the Uyghurs or Uyghur activists or just us, like, we could do in general to garner more support, from people that are, in Australia, Canada, US, like just non-Uyghurs, but from countries that have the ability to do something, or the people that live a comfortable life enough so that they don't have to worry about their own, survival, but they can start thinking about other, human beings as well.
Right.
What do you think?
It's interesting. I think my answer is probably twofold. I think on the one side, just keep living your life, but visibly, but noticeably. By that I mean wear your dopa, apply to your local school to provide, Uyghur after class language lessons, that kind of thing. Make yourselves a visible presence, and in return, people will go, "What's that language you need your kids to speak? What's that hat you're wearing?" and learn a bit more about you. And I think there's a big visibility argument. The fact that people don't know Uyghurs, they don't see Uyghurs, they don't, out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
From an activism perspective, I think the playbook's pretty clear. I don't think there are any secrets. I think write to your local MP in Canada as often as you can and say, hey, why are you not bringing this up at Parliament every chance you get? Write to your local council, write to whoever. Just, I guess, sort of gain as much momentum or recognition as you can. But I think it's in order of winning over the hearts and minds of people, everyday people in Canada or Australia or whatnot. I think it's super important for them to see and understand your culture, to, try and hold Uyghur cultural festivals in public, try and, gain a stand at whatever's going on in Toronto that week. Get out there, be seen, and I think in return people will be interested. They'll come and take a look. The same way you get crowds of people coming to attend, a dragon dance for Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
If there's a festival that's going on and it's public, people will want to come and take a look. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
honestly, like everything you're saying, I wholeheartedly agree, and I love that. Just for some of our audience members that are saying, why aren't the Uyghurs doing this? I'm sure there's lots of Uyghurs out in the diaspora. The biggest challenge I think we have right now is that China's influence and their outreach in different countries. They say, hey, don't speak out about your the tortures that you're facing every day. Because remember, we have your family members back home. Like, we can put them in a concentration camp too. Like, they are able to silence them, suppress them, and oppress them outside of Canada, right? And I mean it. And on the contrary side, like, if Uyghurs came out and said support Xinjiang, support China's minority, the Uyghur community would be upset with those Uyghurs, right? So it's like a really tricky play, but a lot of us are doing our best to advocate as well, in any way possible. So if you guys are more interested in what organizations like Dharman is doing, absolutely give us a follow, DARMAN.foundation, Darman.foundation. We're more kind of Canada/Toronto area based. But there's a lot more communities like us that's doing a phenomenal job in any way possible of advocating for us at Dharman. We've kind of focused on the Muslim communities because we feel like many of them do resonate with it, and with our faith, it's a little bit easier for them to kind of understand and emphasize with that as well. Switching gears a little bit, when you did travel to East Turkestan, speaking of the geography, what were like the top cities or major cities that you visited, and what was one thing that you took away from that?
Okay, so sort of my route. I guess I came through. I arrived by train into Turpan, and I basically wanted to travel along, predominantly along the sort of southern rim of the Taklamakan Desert. So those old oasis towns, Churcha and Hotan, Yarkand, across there. And I think culturally, what you see across that bottom rim is quite similar in terms of very small mud brick towns, which I understand a lot are under immense threat at the moment. But that was really interesting, and that was, I guess, especially in the church and that corner by where Xinjiang and Tibet meet in that sort of modern Chinese mess. That was a really interesting corner because it sort of you really felt far from everything, and it just felt like this whole little Uyghur world. I was maybe like a 3-day drive from Urumqi. And, to get to all these places, I'd be sitting on bus just through the desert. So that was really cool. I also spent a fair bit of time in Kashgar. I went across the highway, Kucha, Urumqi. And then I also spent a little bit of time up north by like Kanas and that area. But, that area, the Uyghur presence is a lot less noticeable just due to the demographics of the area. And I certainly found that for those who want to experience sort of living dynamic Uyghur culture, the south and in particular cities like Khota, Yarkand, Kashgar, these are great historic cities, and I was actually a bit taken aback by how rich the historic sites were. The fact that there were like 1,000-year-old shrines, or outside of Kucha, there are some beautiful cave frescoes from Silk Road days, and in any other country in the world, that would be like a #1 site. But, here it's just one small town to another.
It's another town, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, I'm so fascinated that like you remember such details and even the city names that you traveled to. Because especially since you traveled to so many different places. Wow, I'm so glad that you're not like, I forgot, but it's like this, like you're well on it, with your knowledge.
It was an impressionable trip.
Thank you so much. What was like your favorite food of Uyghurs that you tried?
Okay, so this I'm embarrassed to answer this because I'm vegetarian, which I know is blasphemy for you guys.
Oh my goodness. Okay, no, respect to you. I love that. Yeah. So what did you try, or what did you like?
Langman, I love langman.
Okay.
Like
langman with no meat, right?
Yeah, with no meat. Which most of the Uyghur people, like especially in the large cities in China that are selling langman, they sell it without meat. So that was great.
Okay.
Obviously, all the naan everywhere.
Did you know that you probably extended your life by at least 5 years by eating lakman?
Really?
On our birthdays, yeah, we eat lakman on our birthdays because we want our life to be long like lakman. The handful noodles. It's a thing. It's a thing that we believe in.
I love it. So
yeah, it's interesting how I wonder how they made the lakman for you, because sometimes the meat and every single ingredient is really important to come up with the flavor, right? But definitely, like, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching and you are able to eat meat, I would recommend that you Google Uyghur cuisine or Uyghur restaurant. And as long as you're in a major city like in Canada, Australia, US, you'll be
definitely.
able to find our food, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uyghur cuisine.
yeah.
So that's very important. Give me 1 second. Okay, perfect. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any other questions or comments, post them below, and we will answer them. But I have a couple more for you in the meantime.
Alrighty.
Um, uh, so, have you have you had the opportunity to connect with Uyghurs, I guess, in person outside of East Turkestan? And how has that been for you, whether physically or just virtually? Like, what has,
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, certainly in Central Asia, but that was sort of right after my trip. It was sort of one and the same trip. I went from there, Kazakhstan,
Mhm,
Uzbekistan, and there's large Uyghur communities around there.
mhm,
But I think a bit like the Uyghurs I'm connecting with on Instagram at the moment. These were Uyghurs that have left their homeland many years before, with the odds of returning anytime soon pretty slim. And they would thrive at all this information of how things were, or showing photos and things like that. So that was great. Um, and then now through Instagram, it's a great resource to get in touch with people like you, and just important people in the Uyghur community globally, and especially to see some of these great organizations which are raising the profile of Uyghurs. And then as part of my research, I also sort of was involved or was meeting with a number of leading people in the Uyghur culture. I actually interviewed what's the guy that's president now of the Congress? Isun Dolka?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I interviewed him when
So
he was
funny.
like he must have been like a secretary or something at the time, but now he's like a
Yeah.
big shot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Wow, you got to speak with him. He's just full of wealth of knowledge, right? And
yeah, yeah,
he's been
totally.
involved with the Uyghurs activism for a very long time now. So the fact that you were able to connect with so many influential or Uyghurs that have a genuine passion for not even the political situation, but also cultural as well. With Dokun Isakash, Dokun Isa, people like himself are really good resources to
Hmm.
work with.
Totally.
Um, yeah, so I absolutely love that. And just want to take a quick pause, really quick, to let everybody know once again that this live with our friend Dan has been supported by Dharman Foundation, and we were able to do this thanks to Canadian Summer Jobs Initiative. Really, really appreciative of that, and we encourage that anybody who's involved, who has an interest in helping Uyghurs, to look into external resources like your local government. You can get funded to be able to work with such events. So thank you so much for that. Dan, before we dive into questions from our, audience, our comments, do you have any final thoughts or anything like that that you want to, you can take a moment to think about it, things that you want to leave with, whether the Uyghurs or non-Uyghurs, anything that's top of mind that you would like to kind of mention?
I think just sort of something that struck me in the last week is, I've had a lot of great Uyghur organizations and social media profiles reach out, and I think it's really impressive how many of you out there are sort of in the diaspora, or many of the younger ones who have never even been over there, um, that they're keeping their culture alive and that they're passionate for the cause, and I think that's really really impressive. And it's obviously it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gotten to the point where, unfortunately, right now, many of the activists' mindset is that even the young ones, right, that have family back home, it's just like I can't think about my family anymore. Like I have to think about Uyghurs as a whole. Like I have to think about, everyone else. So when they get harassing calls from their local Chinese embassy, Chinese embassy from Canada, Toronto, like anywhere, saying, hey, like you should stop this or else this, they're like, sure, like I really don't care. We've gotten to the point where it's just like we have to fight for our people and the ones that are suffering, like there's a lot of people that do advocate, but the ones that they advocate, they may have a family member that's in a concentration camp and something like that, right? But what about the millions of people that don't have a relative in the diaspora that can advocate for them, that can testify for them, right? So it's just like it's just really tricky, complicated situation. And in terms of activism, there are different forms of activism. You don't have to publicly say East Turkestan or like go to protest. Like we believe that, or many of us, I'm not speaking on behalf of our activists, of course, but just in my opinion, is like when you improve yourself to be the best you can, and when you succeed in your own endeavors, like you are fighting for Uyghurs, right? That's how we see it, especially in the diaspora, right? Because when you become someone notable, when you have more influence, when you succeed, it always comes back to hopefully, helping your own people as well. So that's how we see it. And really side question for you there. I personally don't know much about your background, but you mentioned that you are Jewish. I know that there are many Uyghurs that look up to the Jewish community of, your upbringing, the mindset that you were instilled as a kid. Like, what do you think have been the most kind of profound kind of impact that your own kind of, I guess, ethnic identity has influenced your life, if not at all?
Right. No, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Well, I think our communities are somewhat similar in that um, I guess my family came to Australia after the war as Holocaust survivors, and obviously with very little to their name, and it was sort of important to build up a strong diaspora community after what had been destroyed. I think I guess one of the key differences is that how do I put it? When our family left Europe, everything was destroyed. There was nothing left, and I think the Uyghur community a lot was, you know, your homeland is still there, and your family members are still there. So I guess that is a key difference when we came to new lands with the intention of just setting up life and starting fresh. Well, for you guys, I get the impression it's a little different because there's a lot less, how do I put it, permanent. So your links to the homeland are still very strong. Um, yeah, but I think it's sort of it's these ideals that I was raised on, and it's this heritage which sort of makes certain causes a little more important, a little closer to home.
Mhm. I see. Thanks for sharing that. Wow. Um,
Yeah. Should we take some questions from the crowd
yeah,
before
for
we?
sure.
Because it's
Yeah,
getting
for
late.
sure.
It's getting late here. I got to get to bed soon.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes or so left.
Cool.
One question that we have is, what was like the biggest difference that you've seen between the Uyghurs and then the Hans, Han Chinese people living? Like, what was the most significant kind of difference that you saw between our people and their?
You know what? I would actually say it was something which struck me. I guess I thought that on a grassroots level, obviously in the region, in most towns are almost 50-50 now Uyghur Han Chinese. Um, I thought on a grassroots level there'd be a lot more integration. Now, I'm talking
Mhm.
2014. I know a lot has changed in the last 6 years, but when I was there, my experience was um, no one spoke each other's language. Very few as Uyghurs spoke what I would say fluent Mandarin. Like it was a lot of broken Mandarin, enough Mandarin to get by. I
Mhm.
realize that will probably change now as the school education system has really rapidly changed in the last 10 years. But I guess the flow on effect of that meant that within sort of the mainstream Chinese economy, there weren't Uyghurs there. And that sort of resulted in sort of a sub economy, and from what I saw. So on one main street in almost all large cities, and the most striking was one in Kucha. There was one main road, and on one side of the road was a shopping center that was a Han Chinese shopping center. Everyone was Chinese, the shops were Chinese, the stores were Chinese, and then you literally walked maybe 300-400 meters, and there was another shopping center, and everyone was Uyghur, and the shops were all Uyghur. They were selling Turkish rugs, they were, selling Uyghur food, and it was as if there were two worlds. Obviously, there's other noticeable differences. The demeanor, is I'm not a cultural commentator. I can't comment on these things, but there is a clear cultural difference. Obviously, the Islam is very important within Uyghur culture and Uyghur everyday life. And I was traveling mainly during Ramadan, so it was perhaps even more visible.
Prevalent.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that makes that's a noticeable difference. Clothing and dress, which I realize is kind of under attack or a bit controversial at the moment over there, but
Even
um,
wearing this or having
yeah,
this is controversial.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I saw them measuring beards.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah, that
Those are
was
some weirds.
again back then. Now I don't think you're allowed beards at all, right?
No.
Um,
No.
so yeah, that was different. And obviously, I guess sort of modesty, the way women would dress. I was there during summer, so it was well above 45 degrees, and you could see the change in people's clothes from wearing shorts and t-shirts to you cross the road, and it's a little different.
Right, right. Wow.
Yeah,
Um, Dan, since we have a little bit of time left, can you give like your Instagram handle and what people can do to learn even more about yourself as well as your adventure back in East Turkestan or I guess Xinjiang, now
sure,
the
sure, sure.
China occupied land. Yeah, just if you don't mind, just give some call to action. We would love to. I'm sure after all the everyone has learned a little bit more about you and your fascination, your mindset with this. They would love to, continue to follow your adventure.
No, that'd be great. Thank you so much. So my name's Dan. If you go to the top left corner, that DHERSZ, that's my handle. Yeah, right there. Um, you'll see sort of right on my homepage, there'll be a little circle. It says Xinjiang. Um, if you click on that, I've got a great story set about my adventures over there and just sharing some of my opinions, impressions. Um, and please, if you have any questions, please reach out. I love interacting with people. I love hearing people's stories. If you're a Uyghur in particular, please reach out. I want to hear your story. I want to know what's going on with you guys. And yeah,
Could you spell out your Instagram handle just because this may be shared elsewhere and they may not have that awesome button?
sure. DHERSZ.
Awesome. And
DHERS.
is there anywhere else that everyone can follow you? Do you have a website or
I
anywhere else
don't.
you want
I
to
don't have
shout
a
out?
website. I'm just on Instagram. But yeah, like I said, I message me on Instagram, and I'm always happy to chat. Um,
Super.
yeah.
And everyone else who's watching this, the recorded version, or who have just joined, we do have a recorded version saved of this conversation. So if you guys want to look back or review them or watch it again, you're more than welcome to. And once again, I really want to be able to thank everyone who is watching. You guys had so many comments, so many great feedback for us. I
Thank you.
apologize we haven't been able to get to everyone. However, if you message us or message Dan, I'm sure we'll be able to discuss those for you as well. The handle has been linked below. Again, Dan's handle is DHERSZ. And my name is Dilyar, Dilyar, and my Instagram is Dilyar Life, DILYARLIFE. And once again, we thank Dharman Foundation for
Thank you,
hosting this
Damon.
in support of Canadian summer jobs. Dharman is DARMAN dot foundation. And yeah, Dan, once again, from the bottom of
Thank
our
you.
heart, with the power of, almost, I guess, million or more than a million Uyghurs around the diaspora, we thank you so much for taking your time to even, caring about making a single post about us. Beyond a single post, you've been posting a lot, and we really hope that you continue to advocate for our human rights and help us assure that, in your own way, that our culture does not get silenced, our culture does not get wiped out, because there is just so much fascination about us to explore, right, and delve into. Once again, for the non-Uyghurs that are watching us, if you want to learn more about the Uyghur people, it's spelled Uyghur. So when you Google that, you'll be able to just get lost in just wealth of information. I absolutely recommend watching YouTube videos as well. I mean, Dan, any other parting words? What can people can do to learn more, in your opinion?
I think I always tell
documentary.
everyone hop on Google, type in Uyghur, type in Uyghur everyday life, and you'll have enough news articles to keep you interested.
So yeah, fascinating.
Uh,
Once again, Dan, thank you so much for
Thank you
spending
so
this hour
much.
with us. Really appreciate it, and we hope to see you around more. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for following our adventures, and we hope to see you around with our Uyghur adventures and learning more
Thank
about
you.
us. We really appreciate everybody's love and support. Thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much. Have a good day.
Cheers.
Cheers. See you, man.